Irish Mythology Part 1. The Coming of the Tuatha De Dannan. It was in a mist, the Tuatha De Dannan, the people of the gods of Dana, or as some called them, the men of day, came through the air and the high air to Ireland. It was from the north they came, and in the place they came from they had 4 cities, where they fought their battle for learning. Great Phalias, and shining Gorias, and Phineas, and rich Morias that lay to the south. And in those cities they had 4 wise men to teach their young men skill and knowledge and perfect wisdom. Phineas and Morias, and Arias, the fair-haired poet in Phineas, and Urias, of noble nature in Gorias, and Morias in Phalias itself. And they brought from those 4 cities their 4 treasures: a stone of virtue from Phalias, that was called the Leophile, the stone of destiny. And from Gorias they brought a sword, and from Phineas a spear of victory, and from Morias the 4th treasure, the cauldron that no company ever went away from unsatisfied. It was Nuada was king of the Tuatha De Dannan at the time, but Manannan, son of Lear, was greater again. And of the others that were chief among them were Oma, brother to the king, that taught them writing, and Dian Kect, that understood healing, and Nyat, a god of battle, and Seridanus, the craftsman, and Govnu, the smith. And the greatest among their women were Bav, a battle goddess, and Maka, whose mass feeding were the heads of men killed in battle, and the Morrigu, the crow of battle, and Air, and Folda, and Banva, daughters of the Dagda, that all 3 gave their names to Ireland afterwards, and Aidan, the nurse of poets, and Bridget, who was a woman of poetry, and poets worshipped her, for her sway was very great and very noble, and she was a woman of healing along with that, and a woman of smith work, and it was she first made the whistle for calling one another through the night. And the one side of her face was ugly, but the other side was very comely. And the meaning of her name was Breosight, a fiery arrow. And among the other women there were many shadow forms, and great queens. But Dana, that was called the mother of the gods, was beyond them all. And the 3 things they put above all others were the plough, and the sun, and the hazel tree, so that it was said in the time to come that Ireland was divided between those 3: Coll the hazel, Kect the plough, and Grian the sun. Beautiful, isn't it? Let's get slightly more heady and get out of that mystery. Let's break down some of what I just ran through there, because there's quite a lot. First of all, this may seem like a mythology, a magic fairy tale, but there are some parts of this that are interesting, to say the least. The first, which I will get into, is the premise that they're setting up there, that there is a a root of this Tuatha De Dannan. As I explained before, we don't really know who they were. They could have been some Israeli tribe for all we know, but there's also another theory that they were the Hyperboreans, which Plato claimed were a race of people who lived up on the North Pole and lived forever. They were immortal, so that would fit into our idea here. Now, the idea is that they had 4 cities, and each of those 4 cities had a wise man. And from each of those wise men, they got one treasure, and they brought them down. And what I'm going to show you is something very interesting about one particular treasure. This treasure is the Stone of Destiny. And you're probably like, oh, it's just a fairy tale. The British royal family take this stone and they slot it under their chair when they're getting coronated. And it's a huge bone of contention. It's like really, really important. And they claim that it's the biblical stone that Jacob slept on, but this is the original root of this idea. So let me show you something.
The same stone which the patriarch Jacob used as his pillow at Bethel in Palestine, and which later he set up as a memorial pillar. It became one of the most sacred treasures of Israel, a talisman of priceless value, carried with the nation wherever it went. At her coronation, Her Majesty the Queen is presented with the Holy Bible by the moderator of the Church of Scotland as the most precious thing this world affords. Here is wisdom. This is the royal law. These are the lively oracles of God. In Hatfield House, Hertfordshire, there is a great wall chart made for Queen Elizabeth I, in which her ancestry is traced back as far as King David of Israel. A noble pedigree indeed.
Well, it's just a part of history coming back to Scotland where it belongs. So it's exciting for us as Americans to be part of that.
The Stone of Destiny has nothing to do with Parliament. The Stone of Destiny is to do with our heritage as far as the history of Scotland's concerned. The Stone of Destiny goes way back further than even the Kings of Scotland.
We've been waiting for 700 years for this stone to come back, and it's a symbol of our sovereignty as a nation, and I look forward to the sovereignty coming back in reality when we have our own parliament.
What do you think of the return of the stone though? Do you think that's a good thing?
If it's looked upon as a step in the direction of recognising us as an independent culture, yeah.
This is the golden link.
I now, therefore, on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen, place the Stone of Scone in the care of you, the Commissioners for the keeping of the regalia of Scotland.
3,000 years ago, the King David of Israel was chosen by God to bring the nation to the peak of its greatness.
The continuation of this tradition is an essential element of the return to Scotland of the stone, and as Her Majesty's warrant states, it is our duty to make appropriate arrangements to ensure that at all future coronations in Westminster Abbey, the successors of Her Majesty as sovereigns of the United Kingdom shall be crowned seated upon the Stone of Destiny.
Today, Britain's royal house publicly accepts allegiance to Almighty God by receiving into its hands at the coronation service the Word of God.
My friends, I love the royals. They're so much fun. They really they do things in a glamorous way. The reason why that stone matters is because apparently when the true monarchs touch that stone, you'll see from later on in these myths, the stone cries out in an ecstatic human voice. This is the true monarch, so it's quite important. The crying stone, you could say. The Stone of Destiny. Now, what's interesting about this, and this is where we hit at our first, shall we say, conflict in literature, our first problem, major problem. As you can see in that video, they cast this stone as originating from Israel and from David. And as I said, the one story is that the tribe of Dan, the Tuatha De Dannan, came from the Israeli tribes, and so that centralizes everything down there. That's a southern origin. But if we're to read this text that I just read, honestly, it says very straightforwardly that the Tuatha De Dannan came from the north. Now, this is a very weird idea because all of our conceptions of the world is that we originated out of Africa, went to the Fertile Crescent, then moved up to Ireland. This is suggesting that there was an alternate way of things working. This is even wackier than the Atlantis theory that I was banging on about last time. And this is best explained through the old theory that Plato again talked about, which he called the Hyperboreans. Plato said that on the North Pole, so all compasses point to north, on the North Pole was a civilization, and the civilization lived forever, and they were super healthy and super godlike, and they walked among the gods, like the way they all talk about in the old mythological stories. Now, this can be read many different ways. You can read it allegorical, but we're going to go a little bit literal and say that perhaps the North Pole, hypothetically, in their worldview, was a, shall we say, an axis monkey. It's like a rock band. Axis mundi, so that is like the center of the world. You can think of it like the belly button of the universe. So we have this conception that the world is like a globe, but these people didn't think that way. They sort of saw the world as flat. This was the ancient cosmology. So flat earthers are going to love this video. And this idea was that the Earth was this kind of like flat plane, and the North Pole was the center. It was the axis mundi, and so everybody who was close to the North Pole would have the most spiritual powers and be the most healthy. And then as you move away from the North Pole, you somewhat fall, you could say. So it's almost like the North Pole is Eden or something like that. And we're getting this conception that the North Pole is the source of the Tuatha De Dannan. These people came from that place down out of the down past Iceland and into Britain and Ireland, and bringing this magic stone with them. So that is an antagonizing narrative to, it's a contradictory narrative to the biblical one, and it's hard to resolve this. It's hard to know which is true, because obviously the onus, once the Romans appeared and then put Christianity into the forefront and Europe became Christian, was that, okay, we're gonna make sure everything is Christian. Now, you don't know if they're telling the truth or if they took the Irish myths and flipped them into a Christian way. But considering that this actual Irish myth itself proclaims a northern origin, and this was written in Christian times, makes you stroke that beard a little bit, being like, who were these Tuatha De Dannan, and where did they actually come from? So what's going on? I'm going to show you a few maps to show you why, that just flesh this theory out a little bit more, and how the sense of the 4 cities at the North Pole makes it shows you a different worldview.
The 14th and 15th centuries, the North Polar Arctic was imagined not as an uninhabitable sheet of ice as modern-day scientists and cartographers hold, but as a series of circular islands. The number of islands vary among these maps, although striking similarities can be seen, even on maps that were made thousands of miles away from one another. Did the map makers of the time simply copy and make additions to the popular maps which were false? Or perhaps, as I'm proposing, that this series of Arctic lands is not made up, but exists on our Earth?
When you look into it,
Hyperborea is the ancient Greek name for the land beyond the north wind, the North Polar paradise of many names. In Pliny's Natural History by Pliny the Elder, written in the 1st century AD, Hyperborea is mentioned, like so many other Roman sources, as being past the Riphean Mountains, located on the border of the ancient land of Scythia, which we've shown in some Hyperborean maps of the Arctic as extending to southwest Asia, a few hundred miles from the pole. From this text, I quote, "Within a little are the Riphean Mountains, and a country called Pterophorus, for the resemblance of wings occasioned by the continual fall snow, a part of the world condemned by the nature of things, and immersed in thick darkness, having no sheltering places but the work of cold, the produce of the freezing north wind. Beyond those mountains, and beyond the North Pole, there is a happy nation whom they call Hyperborea, who live exceedingly long, and are celebrated for fabulous wonders. There are believed to be the poles of the world, and the very ends of the revolution of the heavens, having for 6 months together one entire day, and night as long. The region is open to the sun of a happy temperature, void of all hurtful impulse of air. The woods are their habitations, and the groves where they worship the gods man by man, and in companies. Discord and all disease are unknown, and they never die, but when they are satiated with life, when the aged men, having feasted and anointed their bodies, leap from a certain rock into the sea, this kind of sepulture is the most happy.
What?
No, God! No, God, please, no! 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 No!
Hey, but we're just trying to get into the heads of these people, you know? There's also an interesting thing where many people from the Far East have a very, very similar idea that there's a magical land up north. So it's this sense of northern origin, and evolution is more like devolution. And we all began as gods, as the myths tell us, you know. It's the myths almost always speak of a golden age that we devolved from. Now, this could all simply just be psychological. That's the thing. It could be some type of Jungian archetype sense where you've got like the 4 base powers like earth, water, air, and fire, and you've, in some sense, like that was a perfect ordered place, like the Big Bang, you know. Everything was just put together in this like tiny little one ball of super energy, and then it's just burst out and becomes slightly more complex, and entropy is kicked in and whatnot. And so it could be some type of psychological way of explaining the universe in a metaphor of some sort, but who knows? Now, it is very, very frustrating that we do not have any more information about those 4 cities, nor do we have much more information about the 4 poet druids that taught the Tuatha De Dannan who they were. This is obviously a consequence of lost history, and it is just simply a tragedy. Who knows what we're losing? So it gives us plenty of, shall we say, blank paper in order to speculate with. But nonetheless, it is very, very sad, and we don't really know much more. But a lot of information we do have on the gods. We do know a lot about the people that we named, so I will explain a few of the gods here. So the pantheon of the Tuatha De Dannan is quite straightforward. You have Nuada, who is the king. He later becomes Nuada of the Silver Arm, and you will see why in the story. But greater than him is a man called Manannán mac Lir, or Manannán, son of Lir. So Lir is the sea god. You can imagine, and if we were to read all that mad conspiracy theory I just painted there earlier, if we read that from a Jungian perspective, you can imagine the gods are things that arrive out of the unconscious. And Jung says that the unconscious mind, or the deep mind, the kind of place where your imagination is from and the ideas seem to come from, the deep mind is almost always represented as an ocean. The same way that in the biblical story you have God floating over the chaos. It's almost like the chaos itself is personified as the unconscious, and here it's personified as a god, Lir. So it's ocean worship essentially, and Lir is super old, super respected, that type of idea. And his son Manannán is, Lir, and the ocean is also the land of death. It's that type of eternal sleep, you know. And so Manannán is sort of like he's almost like a surfer, I guess, in a way, and he takes people out into the ocean, into death. So he's sort of like the god of waves. You might have seen that Guinness ad where the horse shows up in the middle of the waves. Manannán's sort of like that character, that he's skilled over the waves and whatnot, and he can transport people and hide people in mists. So people often say that he kept the Isle of Man hidden for many evil people by covering it in mist and whatnot. So you have Manannán, that type of character, and he's supposed to be a supreme deity beyond even the king. And then you have Nuada, who is the fucking king, but he's sort of below him. It's almost like this is like the mystical level, and there's no such thing as beating that authority. And then Nuada is the manifest god of the earth in some sense. And then you have his set of brothers and his family members and the various other people there. And so Nuada is sort of like Zeus, or maybe even Kronos, maybe something older than that or something. And it's quite similar to the Greek pantheon. And this is like as I proposed, if the southern origin theory is right, it could quite easily have been a similar, shall we say, Indo-European origin for this mythology. And you have Oma, who's I think the brother to the king. Oma is a writing god. He's very similar. He's similar in concept to the idea of Thoth from the Egyptian myths. It's it's that idea of a god of writing, a god of scripture, a god of order. And there's many stones you find from old Ireland that have like loads of marks in them. We call them ogham stones. They were ways of communicating, ways of writing down. Now, interestingly, we then have Dian Cecht, who is a healing god, a god of a doctor, if you want to think about him that way. That type of, you'd imagine him like the shaman who can pick up the right herb and crunch it up and then put it on your face, and then suddenly like the beast thing goes away or something like that. He's a magical healer. He can fix things. And so many mythologies would combine the likes of Oma and the healer together and make them into sort of a wise man character, but here we have them split, and that's interesting to say the least. Then we've got Niat, who is the god of war. He is almost exactly like the idea of Ares. His name literally means fire or passion, or like that type of energy, that type of emotion. So we've got that. He's an old god, obviously. Next we get Govnu and Cretinus. Again, there's sort of two similar ideas. You've got Govnu as a smith, a blacksmith, and also a guy who sets up feasts. So he's like sort of, the bro who throws parties, and he builds weapons and stuff like that. He's somewhat of a craftsman, like Vulcan, I'd imagine he'd be similar. That's the Roman god of volcanoes, but also the guy who makes swords and stuff. And then you've got Cretinus, who is a craftsman. Now, the information on this guy is sparse, but crafts, as opposed to smithing, might be something then along the lines of carpentry of some sort. So he might be the proto-Jesus of the pantheon of some sort. But yes, he was a craftsman, so he'd be more making things, perhaps clothes, boots, those type of things. So that's interesting. Now we bop into the goddesses. Now this is actually fascinating. I love the way the Irish represent the goddesses, because it is, I think in the New Age circles, people are sort of like, oh, the goddess, she's so wonderful and beautiful. But it like the Irish, the three probably most prominent Irish goddesses are all goddesses of war and death and brutality. Like they're utterly, they're so intense. So they're called the Morrigu, and you have within them Bav, Macha, and Naiman, but Naiman's not mentioned here. They just call the last one Morrigu. But essentially what you have is you've got a crow, that type of idea. Like Woden, you might know from Norse mythology, has a raven or a crow on his shoulder that acts as his eye because he lost his eye, and the raven like flies around and watches the battlefield the same way as like vultures would. It's that similar type of ideas that ravens gather when there's a battle, because they're about to, it's almost like they're watching each soul and judging the value of the men. And if a man is courageous and strong and smart and fights well, they'll spare him, but if he fails, the Morrigu will swoop down and eat him. It's the devouring feminine, you could say, the dark feminine. So the Irish play very heavily on that idea of the brutality of the feminine instinct and the dark feminine and whatnot. So you have that in Bav, and she's like that battle goddess. And there's also this personification of fear. So the Greeks have this god, I believe, called Phobos, where we get the word phobia from, and it's essentially battle fear. So what it would look like when there's a big army of Greeks in front of you, and say one of them gets spooked, like the way you can watch sheep. If one sheep gets spooked and runs, all the sheep are going to run. It's like this, it's almost like this demon possesses one sheep, and then it spreads through the whole herd like whoosh. And it's from that perception, it looks like a god just swooped down and took them all away. And so the Greeks had this idea of Phobos would be this god that would swoop down into the battlefield at one point and just capture an army, even if they were like a bigger army, but it would capture them and make them flee, and that would cause a rout to happen. Routs are often brutal, horrible yokes. Bav was that type of goddess. She was the crow floating around, but also she was the feminine. His emotions are feminine, striking that fear into people, and then that would suddenly cause them to panic and run and lose themselves or something like that. And so you had the Morrigu, the crows of destiny, fate, brutality, choosing, the glory of men, being chosen by the feminine. And most interestingly, you have Macha then as what we call a sovereignty goddess, or a goddess of reward for victory. So victory is actually a Roman goddess, and she was the Roman goddess of triumph, of winning, hence the name, hence where we get the word. And so you can think of Macha as the result what happens when a king defeats another land and defeats another king and claims the land, he's going to get the princess, and he's going to get to marry the princess. And so it's that idea of the feminine reward. You know, you get the princess because you've beaten the other king. And so Macha, and that also affirms, like, once you have a baby with the princess, it's pretty much set in stone. It's like, you're the man of the land now. You've claimed that land. You're now the ruler. That type of idea. And so Macha is, in essence, victory, and what she does is she legitimizes the winner by giving him a baby, I guess, or like sometimes it's just sex as well. Sometimes there's no baby or marriage involved. They're very loose in morals back then. and so there's that type of sense about Macha. She's like the victorious, rewarding feminine, and then you have the brutal, dark, choosing feminine within the context of the battle. So I think that is an amazing cast of. I don't see that really played out that well in any other set of mythology. So I think Ireland, well done. Now, those Morrigoons, specifically Macha, and the way that she was the legitimizer of the males who were ruling, the patriarchs who were ruling the land. The land itself was named after. Had a name, had a personification. So it's an interesting play on what the feminine might mean. So in a sense, the feminine is the land, like, you know, Mother Russia type idea. And so, but then personified out of the land is like the legitimizing emotion of the feminine, where she says, this king I choose, and here's me mating with him to affirm my thoughts on this. And so they have three, shall we say, land goddesses, and we have Eru, who they say is Ere, and this is where we get the word Erin, and where we got the word air land from the Brits. When the Brits came over with their Norse, and they said stick land at the end of that, and with their Germanic they said stick land at the end of that. So this is where we got Ireland. So Eru is one of the goddesses, another one is Banv, and the other is Folda. And so those three can be used synonymous with Ireland. They all mean Ireland. They all mean the land. The same way as Albion means England, but not England. It means like the British island. You know, it means the Scots, the English, and the Welsh all together. They live on Albion, and over here we all, the Northern Irish and the Irish, all live on Eru, or Folda, or Bamba. Apparently, by the way, the name Eru means derived from a Proto-Indo-European word for fat. So Ireland was considered the land of the fat land, the land of abundance, shall we say, which is cool. Then we get Eden, which is she's a poet. She's the same as she's the healer form, but not necessarily the fixer, more of the nurse, so more of the nourisher. You could think of her. When you're sick, she'd be there like wiping the thing, being like, you'll be all right there. Ah, Jesus. Have some flat 7-Up there. Go on there. I made you some flat 7-Up. And then you have Bridget. Bridget is a very important goddess, very important. She was so important that we still make little swastikas to her. It's like traditional. We make these little Bridget's crosses, which are like mad little 4-sided cross. Oh my god, they actually are swastikas. What the fuck? That's crazy. And we burn. Apparently, Bridget had this like. Bridget is the muse. She is the goddess of inspiration, of fire, of passion, of imagination, of creativity. She is the poet's muse, hence why the writer here just gives her like loads of props compared to the other goddess, because he's like, please Bridget, don't fuck with me now, like keep coming to me there, like, you know, I'm talking to the boys. So Bridget's a really, really important god, and she is the god of inspiration, shall we say, hence her naming as fiery arrow. You can imagine that you get shot by the fire of inspiration, the same ways as the Greeks had that idea of Cupid and his arrow, or was that the Romans, and shooting and hitting you and you get inspired with love. It's that type of concept. Now moving on to Adana, the root name of the Tuatha De Dannan. Now this is problematic for people, because there's a lot of debate as to why Dana is there, because she barely features in the stories at all. She's not really that big of a deal, but she seems to have been almost like, you know, the great worshipped ancestor. And so there's many possibilities. One of them, for example, is the idea of Dana being similar to the Vedic god, and thus connecting it all to the Aryan Scythian race that we were talking about, and it being a Vedic god to do with to flow the waters, and the waters run, and that is so this Dana was essentially the god of rivers and water, and the feminine god of generation. So you can imagine you've got that giant premier goddess, which is Lear, which is the god of oceans and water and the deep unconscious, and perhaps rivers is some sense of that moving into the lands of some sort. So the theory is that the tribe of Dan, or the Aryans, if you will, took over, and wherever they went they would call the rivers after themselves, and they called places after themselves. But then there is a competing theory which is equally as fascinating, and this is where my reading of Nietzsche has... Read your books, people. Hey, they'd help you out here. Nietzsche was talking about the derivative of the root of the word Aryan. The idea of the people would always name themselves after being... A tribe would always name themselves after being the dominant race in a situation. So the Aryans called themselves the rich. That's actually what Arya means. It means those who possess. That's the sort of root of the idea. Those who have, those who are, those who possess, that type of thing. And so the Romans called them, had this sense of calling the Romans, or especially the warrior side of them, as the bonus. The bonus being like extra to an extent. And that actually derives from a root word called donus. And that sort of means exceptional in some sense, and it also means aristocrat, which is what an aristocrat is almost like the cream of the crop type situation. It's the cream of the milk is the wheat from the chaff type situation. You've got like a small group of elites ruling the whole society. And so there is a competing theory suggesting that Dana, the tribe, the men of day, may have been somewhat related to that idea of donus, or like that Dan root of some sort. So we was Romans. That's pretty much the conclusion of this video. Another conspiracy theory, just throwing the fucking bonfire. There you go. Yeah, I should clear up, like that old Latin bonus comes from a Proto-European and thus Celtic Proto-European word diano, which means good, and good sort of means great, the best, godlike, that type of thing. The old way of good, thanks to Nietzsche teaching me. And from there you have the plough, the sun, and the hazel tree. And we will get into that a bit more in future episodes. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much for watching. And if you have any comments, tell me which god you think is the best. Just fucking go down there and just write to me and say, I think this god is class, and this is the reasons why. And if you know of any people who would geek out on Irish myth, you know, have any Irish friends or people with Irish heritage, or flat earthers, whoever you want to go for, send this video to them. Let's get a bit of energy in this video and see what people think of the hidden magic myths of Irish culture. Much love. I'll see you later.